This week on CrunchWeek, we're talking about the privacy setting changes from Google and Facebook, Zulily's potential big IPO, and all the news around Twitter. Welcome to CrunchWeek. I'm Lena Rao.
I'm Colleen Taylor.
And I'm Anthony Ha.
Big news this week, but first I think we should start with some of the privacy changes from some of our favorite web giants.
Dark overlords.
Yes.
Let's just get that out there early. Yeah.
I mean, one of them was Facebook now doesn't allow you to be unsearchable, basically. So, Colleen, you actually were unsearchable, but no longer am.
I was. There's no longer that option there. Facebook removed.
So everyone go search for Colleen Taylor right now.
You'll find me and see all my embarrassing college pictures. It'll be great. Yeah, I think this is a big deal. I mean, obviously our readers think it's a big deal. This news just came out on Thursday, and it's already one of our most viewed stories of the week. I think that this is really taking away people's control that they had since Facebook began. So this is big. They're trying to downplay it in their language and discussing it.
Right.
I mean, and one point that fair to point out that Josh Constein, the writer of the article that was published on our site, he said that there were other ways that you could be searchable, even if you weren't necessarily listed as not being able to be searched on Facebook.
Or not searchable exactly, but like people could find your profile in
That's
other
right.
ways.
Yeah, find your pictures, find your profiles.
Right. Like if you're tagged in someone else's photo.
Yeah. So this kind of was a little bit almost a formality in some ways, but. Do you feel like your privacy is somewhat violated?
I don't know. Facebook, it's been a slow chipping away for so long. And actually this morning, I mean, I love Facebook. I look at it, at least a few times a week, and it's how a lot of people invite people to events and things. So I still feel like I couldn't quite get rid of my profile, but it did kind of cross my mind for a second, thinking, maybe it's time. Maybe this kind of thing is just time for me to get off of Facebook. If I really care about my privacy, if there's something that I really don't want strangers to be able to see about me, I should just remove it entirely.
Because I found that definitely at some point, in the last, 9 years, it's, that my view of Facebook has changed, where I think I used to think of it as a private space for me and my friends. Like, at a certain point I realized that I think of my Facebook profile as a public profile. And I mean, I also went in and changed all the settings to sort of enforce that, where everything I do on Facebook is public, because I just kind of assume that anyway. But I mean, I think that's an easy thing to say, but I think there's a lot once you start seeing like weird spammy behavior on like your account, people starting to send you messages, it's like that's actually not like an ideal experience at Facebook. Yeah. But I do think to get back to the point that Lena was making and that Josh made in his post, I think it is always kind of this like weird balance for Facebook where I think you want to have like really granular privacy controls, but also like then it just becomes impossible to know what you are and aren't sharing, and making any kind of change to your own settings becomes like really overwhelming. So I think it's good, like that's I think what they're always trying to like
they're like almost like decrease the amount of things you have to control.
Right, and I don't necessarily think, I think sometimes anytime there's like a privacy change on Facebook, people assume it's sort of malevolent, but I think in some cases it really is more about like simplification. But I mean it could also be both. It could be malevolent and simplifying.
Well, speaking of malevolent, Google.
Wow, we're really going for it this week. That's good.
We really are. Google updated its terms of service this week as well. That basically allows you to.
It allows Google to take your, I think your recommendations and
your
social
reviews
activity
and anything
and
kind of happening on YouTube
ads.
or Google Plus, and include that in ads. And it's an opt-in type of experience.
No, you are opted in, and then you can opt out if you want.
Right, and I've heard the opt out, is fairly simple to do, but I think with many things, the tech industry and blogosphere is aware of this, and people who are on Twitter know how to opt out. But then the vast majority, the millions and millions of people who use Google don't know that there was a change in the terms of service and probably won't go in.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar in some ways to what Facebook does, with their advertising, incorporating likes and endorsements.
And I think that's, actually, pretty powerful. I think that like it works really well. That like it's not just a message from like this kind of this company like that they're trying to push on you, but actually
Right.
they're like, hey, like your friend liked this, why don't you check it out too? And
Right.
obviously that's can be a pretty powerful message.
Yeah,
Well,
there
we'll
are
see if there's
always
any backlash.
Yeah, there's always funny stories of like your friend liked pregnancy tests, and then that's not really something you
Right,
want to show.
right.
So I'm sure we'll have some funny things.
Yeah, I
that's
mean
gone
that's the thing is
wrong.
always the things that are always I think in some ways the most effective are also the things. The reason they're effective is because they get your attention. So when it's done badly, that's when you're like, okay. And it just to go back to one of your earlier points about like whether or not people will actually know. I mean, you're right. Of course, like people never really follow this stuff that closely, or at least a large number of people. But I will. I mean, I went to Google.com this morning and it said, hey, we have big terms
did,
and
yeah.
changes. So it's like it's not like that. I
There's
think
a
they
big
definitely.
blue thing. On
Right,
the top
so I
of the
think it
screen.
was, they weren't being super sneaky about it either. But I mean, for sure, like you always, I think, if you can, as long as you legally can, I think you always make it your default opted in because
That's right.
otherwise you're just never going to get anyone to opt in.
That's right. Shifting to other news, Zulily filed their S1. Zulily, if you don't know, is like a big e-commerce site for moms. I shop on it. I'm a mom, so I've spent a lot of money. But they filed their S1 this week, intending to go public, maybe potentially raising as much as $100 million, though that's a placeholder amount. But I think what it means, for sort of the bigger ecosystem is that actually consumer startups are now picking their heads up and thinking that they can go public. And, we'll see how the markets react to Twitter and now Zulily and a few others. But it's actually pretty interesting to see the return of the consumer IPO after, Groupon and Zynga and even Facebook didn't do so well in the public market. So I don't know. I mean, maybe we'll see more e-commerce sites like Gilt and others join the group. We'll see.
I agree. I mean, these companies can't be private forever. I guess they could, but if they're venture backed,
Right.
they
Yeah.
kind of have to return that money to investors one way or another. And their last Zulily's case, their last raise was a 85 million Series D round, which is a lot of money. And so their next raise is going to be in the ballpark of 100 million.
right.
And why not get that from the public markets versus yet another venture capital?
Yeah, I mean, it should be interesting to see where the markets value them. They were valued at $1 billion at their last round, and so is it more than $1 billion company? It's unsure. We'll see how it goes. In terms of their revenue, they've been growing a lot. They have a good loyalty when it comes to their customers, moms, but they're not profitable yet. So I think they still have to kind of prove to see whether it's a business that can be
Right.
The next Amazon or something
I do
like
think
that.
that like certainly like the flash sale sites like Zulily, I think they do address. They don't have some of the baggage that I think some of the other consumer IPOs have had. That I think with Groupon and there's always the question of like gimmick and like the cost of acquisition and all this stuff. That I mean,
Right.
I think that's a little bit of an issue for Zulily, but like I mean, not having sort of taken a very close look at the numbers, but I think that that it doesn't have that kind of gimmick feel that I think some Groupons did. And then of course the business model is clearer than like an ad supported or more straightforward than an ad-supported company.
Yeah, we'll see. Well, it'll be interesting to see where they fall when they do end up going public. But
Yeah.
speaking of going public, Twitter, actually the news from this week from Twitter was very much not about going public, even though the company's filed its S1 and expected to go public in a few weeks. There's this amazing expose story, untold story from New York Times writer Nick Bilton, which is it was an excerpt from his book actually, which is all about Twitter, and it just like kind of. At least from what I saw, tweets and comments around the article was just really, really fascinating. The story just hadn't been told of how Twitter came about and the changes between the founders and the CEOs. And I don't know, did you guys all read it?
I did, yeah. And I mean, I think I certainly didn't know a lot about the early days of Twitter. And I think what also like when these kinds of stories come out, it's less that. I mean, I think I definitely saw some other tweets where people said, well, this wasn't that new, this wasn't that new. And I
Right.
mean, there's always a temptation to sort of like pick apart certain things. But I think what is really powerful is when it sort of all comes together and you're like, oh, okay. And it's sort of put in front of this larger audience, which,
Yeah.
including myself, did not start following Twitter until, several years into its history.
Right. Yeah, it's fun. It's open season to kind of talk about Twitter, and everyone's
Yeah.
fascinated by the story and the early beginnings. And there was a lot of detail in Nick Bilton's story. Like Jack Dorsey was sitting at this cafe and he had headphones comes on, they're blaring punk music, and I'm like, really? Like, how do we know that for sure? And did Dorsey tell you that? And if you did get to talk to
That's
Dorsey
the
for
new
this,
journalism,
I'm sure
Colleen. Come
that
on.
is the new journalism, new journalism. No, I loved it. I loved this story, but it's interesting because Alexia wrote a post for TechCrunch this week getting into a meeting of the minds that Jack Dorsey and Biz Stone and Evan Williams all had at Twitter headquarters last week. And it was obviously an all-hands meeting just for Twitter staff, but Alexia has her sources inside. And they said that people in the audience asked the three of them what they thought about this book and all these kinds of stories coming out about the infighting and things like this. But Jack Dorsey, for one, Alexia reported that he said, you know, I don't think that this is interesting because it's the early days of Twitter, but right now we're thinking of 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, and this is going to be minor in that scheme of things. But for now, it's definitely exciting. But one other thing that Paul Graham from Y Combinator always says is that every startup inside of it is a mess, especially in the early days.
That's
like
right.
A mess, you know. So it's no surprise Twitter has the same.
Yeah, the same dynamic, and especially with a group of founders, it's very easy to have stories be told in different ways. And you know that saying, like, there's your story, there's my story, and then there's the truth, right? I mean, I think that's what Nick was trying to get to, because I'm sure he talked to so many different sources to tell this, you know, the story of Twitter. But you know, it was also sort of interesting to see the dynamic between the investors, the early investors, and how they've influenced the company. I mean, you really get to see that, especially if you have early investors who are hands-on, and I think they did, that they do impact the trajectory of a company and you know, bring people on and let people go, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So it's a fascinating read.
I do think that the other thing that makes it, I feel like, has less of an impact on Twitter, you know, sort of the story coming out, is that I think so much of that was already kind of clear just by if you look at who's in charge now and like who found it. You're like, oh, like none of the founders are that involved. Okay, that's implies certain things already, so it's not like a huge shock.
Yeah. Well, the company's also coming under fire this week. There's been a lot of chatter around not having a female board member. And it's not, certainly Twitter's not the first company in Silicon Valley to have an all-male white board, but you know, I guess, you know, people started bringing this up, and there's been a few sort of op-eds around it, and now there's like all these people weighing in on who should become the next female board member of Twitter. So it should be interesting to see, you know, whether they will add someone caving into the pressure.
And it's always, I mean, that's so hard, like, to be, you know, I think especially if it happens right away, is like, then you're like, you are the woman on Twitter's board who joined after everyone complained that there was no woman on Twitter's board, which is not a great situation to be in. Which isn't to say that I think people shouldn't, you know, criticize companies for that, but I just think like that's like a tough situation to be in, you know, if they actually, you know, give into it.
It is, yeah. And like you said, all of this is not new. I mean, Twitter's never had a woman on the board, but now everyone's talking about it. These things kind of flare up, and yeah, who would you like to see as the woman on Twitter's board?
You know, I'd love to see, like, I love that.
You, Colleen.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Colleen.
I was setting you up for that.
A little bit of a fishing expedition.
You know, I love that, like, Starbucks put Clara Shai from Hearsay Social on their board, and really, you know, someone that is young, like, you know, very, very young, but clearly has been able to show that she's like a very good operator and is an entrepreneur. I would love for them to choose a young star, you know, a rising star. I think that would be really interesting to see who they could get. I'm not sure who that is, but there's many of them out there, but that, I think I would like to see that.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, I actually think that's all the time we have this week. Thank you so much for joining us.
Bye.